If you've got anterior pelvic tilt, you've probably heard that weak glutes are the cause. Now the bad news here is that this is total BS, but the good news is that you can still use exercises to make progress. So in this video, we're going to be debunking this myth that the cause of anterior pelvic tilt is weak glutes. We'll be revealing the actual cause of anterior pelvic tilt, and then we'll go through a series of exercises that you can use to actually get results. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So first of all, what even is anterior pelvic tilt? Luckily, we've got my buddy Mr. Phibbs here to help demonstrate. And really what anterior pelvic tilt means is it's just a forward inclination of the pelvis beyond what is considered normal. So the normal inclination of the pelvis, which would roughly be determined by going from this knobby part on the back of the pelvis to this pointy part on the front of the pelvis, is between about 10 and 15 to max 20 degrees. It's a little bit more in women than it is in men, but if you're outside of that range, meaning greater than that range, then you probably have anterior pelvic tilt. So if you want to determine this, you can actually reach around and put one finger on this part here. It's going to be your thumb. And then you're going to put another finger here on the pointy part. That's probably going to be your index finger. So you're going to go like this. And if that angle produced by the fingers in the hand is more than that 20 degrees, then you're probably in an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, if your hand's a little bit too small to do that, you can also use a belt or a waistband as a rough proxy. So if it's parallel to the ground like this, that's neutral. If it starts to incline more than that 20 degrees relative to the ground, then you probably have anterior pelvic tilt. So now that we know what anterior pelvic tilt is, and you know if you have it, now let's get to the actual myth. So again, the myth is that weak glutes are the cause of anterior pelvic tilt, and usually thrown in with this will also be the idea of weak abdominals as well. And so the full story usually goes weak glutes and weak abs in combination with tight hip flexors and tight back muscles then cause this position of anterior pelvic tilt. Now, like any myth, there is a grain of truth to this, and we'll talk about that just in a minute. But overall, this is a completely false narrative. And to understand why, there's a few components that we need to address. First of all, there's the first claim that it's the weakness of the glutes that's causing this position in the first place. The second, which is kind of baked into that, is the assumption that if we increase strength of the glutes, then we're going to be able to address or fix anterior pelvic tilt. And the last, which is also an assumption, is that increasing the day-to-day or moment-to-moment activity in the glutes is likely to result in a reduction of this anterior pelvic tilt. So we'll be going through these one at a time, first looking at some counter examples, then some research, and then actually an activity that you can try for yourself so you can see this myth playing out in real time. So first of all, the easiest way to dispel this myth is to find people with really strong glutes that also have anterior pelvic tilt. And you really don't have to look very far. Two very obvious examples that come to mind would be Usain Bolt or Michael Johnson. But in general, you're going to see with field athletes, people that do track, field, really any sport that requires running, so soccer, football, a lot of times you'll see these anterior pelvic tilt-like positions. And the reason for this is that this position of anterior pelvic tilt actually makes it easier to put force down into the ground. And putting force down into the ground is a very important part of these sports, even though these athletes have tremendously strong glutes. In fact, they probably have stronger glutes than you, and they definitely have stronger glutes than me. Now, the second part of dispelling this myth is looking to the research. So you can do a Google and find numerous studies on this, but one particular study that stuck out was showing that the resting position of anterior pelvic tilt didn't have much of an effect on hip internal or external rotation range of motion or the torque of movements like hip flexion and extension or adduction and abduction. So if strength or range of motion was really correlated with the degree of anterior pelvic tilt, we'd be likely to see something of significance here. Now, the last and maybe most important and practical aspect of dispelling this myth is digging into this idea that more glute activity throughout the day will somehow reduce the amount of anterior pelvic tilt. Now, to understand this, we need to dig into the presupposition that we're going to experience reciprocal inhibition rather than co-contraction. And I know that those terms sound a bit complicated, but they're really not. Reciprocal inhibition just means that when a muscle on one side of a joint contracts, the muscle on the other side of the joint relaxes. And we do see this in this example of contracting my bicep into a shortened position and then letting the tricep relax into a lengthened position to allow for that motion. But on the other hand, we have co-contraction, where we're actually contracting muscles on the opposite side of a joint. So in this same example, I could actually hold my arm still and contract my bicep forcefully, but at the same time, if I start to palpate the tricep, I'll notice that there's a lot of activity there as well. Now we can try the same thing when it comes to anterior pelvic tilt by creating this arched position of the back, getting that pelvis to tip forward, and then squeezing the glutes as hard as we can. Now it might be a little hard to coordinate, but what you'll find is that when you arch your back and bring your pelvis forward, engage your hip flexors as you're doing it, you can actually still squeeze your butt. So just the fact that you're contracting your butt doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to change the position of anterior pelvic tilt. So this brings up the question as to what is actually going on when it comes to anterior pelvic tilt. What is the actual real cause? If we think about what's actually going on inside the body with an anterior pelvic tilt, what we have is a forward movement of our guts in space. Now, what I mean by that is if you imagine your abdominal cavity like a big bag of water, because it's really holding your guts and your organs, which are mainly made of water. You can imagine that water either flowing forward in that cavity or backward. So to illustrate this, I'm bringing out something very technologically advanced, this squishy toy. If you imagine this is the diaphragm, this is the pelvic floor, and then abs go all the way around, let's say this is the front of the body and this is the back of the body. If I go and I push the back like this and shift the fluid forward, you're gonna see that if this was the pelvis, it would incline forward as well. And if we imagine that once again with Mr. Phibbs, if we have all this water here and then we shift it further forward, we're gonna get more back extension and more anterior pelvic tilt. So regardless of what might be contributing to that actual movement forward of the guts in the abdomen, that is the final common pathway. So we can start to work at that level and expect to see some level of results. Now, with that being said, what is actually causing that forward shift could be due to a number of factors, which likely all play together. So on some level, there is a shape of your spine that is more or less genetic. So that definitely is going to play a role. Now, in addition to that, if we're holding tension in certain areas of the body because of stress, that can play a role, or we might have some issue with how we perceive space or how we balance, and that can also change our posture. Now, in reality, once again, these all work together, so you'd want to work with each of these and see which work for you, or simply follow the exercises here to work directly with that final common pathway. If you're getting value from this video so far, consider liking this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video, and if you have any questions, just leave them down below in the comments. Now, if you're still watching this, you might be thinking that exercises might not be the solution for anterior pelvic tilt, especially if it has to do with genetics, stress, perceptual systems, and balance, and in some cases you might be right. But in many cases you can benefit from specific exercises, but reframe the point of this practice a little bit differently. So this is not to improve strength in weak muscles per se, but instead to improve awareness of positions and learn how to let go of tension to get into a more neutral position through letting go, rather than increasing the level of tension in your body. So when you're doing these exercises, make sure that you're doing it with a very gentle, almost meditative-like attitude with very low levels of force and nice, easy, relaxed breathing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the actual exercises. All right, so with this activity, this might start to look a lot like a glute strengthening exercise, but it's really not. So if you feel some glutes, some hamstring, inner thigh, that's all fine. But once again, the point of this is to get in touch with that position. So you might notice I have something elevating the feet here. And the reason for this is that it creates a little bit of a gradient where the lower part of the body is above the upper part of the body, which helps take those guts and move them back and up a little bit. Now, if we increase the amount of elevation of the feet, we'll increase that inversion gradient and we'll make it even easier for the guts to move back. But in this case, we're gonna just start off with a couple inches of elevation and we're gonna get our feet nice and flat. Then from here, we're gonna push down with the feet gently, once again, like a 10 to 20% effort. And then from here, we're gonna simultaneously move the knees forward and allow the pelvis to rock back. As we do all this at the same time, pushing down with the feet, reaching away with the knees, and allowing the pelvis to rock back, we're gonna exhale. So a lot to remember. Exhale. And as we do that, we're not trying to crunch super hard here, but we are going to have the abdominals engaging just gently. And if we can think about those guts inside the abdominal cavity, those abdominals are coming around from all directions, pulling in, and the pelvic floor here is pulling those up a little bit. And the guts are actually gonna move towards where my lower rib cage and mid to low back are, right? And it's not a huge movement, but it's enough to shift those fluids inside of that abdominal cavity. Then once I'm here, I'm gonna do an easy breath in, not losing that position. Getting used to expanding within that new position, then exhaling and reinforcing those initial cues of feet down, knees away, and abs gently in. Then I can repeat the same thing. Nice easy breath in. Feeling expansion into the ground. And then once again, exhale. And in doing this activity, the idea is not what we're engaging, but it's that we're allowing that back to relax as we settle into the ground. So once we've done a couple of reps here, what we want to see is if we can kind of relax all those cues a little bit, and then see if we can allow that pelvis to relax in a little bit more of a neutral position versus an anteriorly pelvic tilted position. And if we go through that a series of times, we're gonna get an idea for it's really that the tension in the back, and maybe a little bit here in the hip flexors as well, is what kind of keeps us there. So we don't need to necessarily squeeze the glutes real hard or crunch the abs to force that position. We simply need to let go of tension in the hip flexors and low back, get a little bit of awareness of that position and what that feels like and how we're moving those guts inside the abdominal cavity. And then from there, we can relax there with equal relaxation on all sides of the joint versus creating more compression on all sides of the joint. So this activity is a standing back to wall reach, and you're gonna start by bringing your feet about 7 to 10 inches away from the wall, and then using them to slightly push back into the wall so that your back just relaxes and flattens right into the wall. Now, I don't want you to force this. So if you're someone that has a very strong arch in the back, just let that relax as much as it can without having to over tense anywhere in your body. And as you practice the breathing that we're gonna go over in a second, you'll find that that starts to relax a little bit at a time. And then over the course of several sessions, you'll find that you'll get closer and closer to the wall without having to add a whole bunch of extra tension anywhere else. So once you're here and your back's closer to the wall, you're then gonna take your arms and bring your palms up toward the ceiling like this, reaching down at a little bit of a low angle, and do a long, gentle exhale. And as you're doing this, you want to think about gently pulling in your abdomen from all sides and taking those guts and tucking them up and back towards the wall. Now, you don't want to squeeze hard and make this a crunch so that the upper part of your body comes off the wall, but instead you want to do a nice long, gentle exhale and gently draw those abs in, just imagining collecting your guts and distributing them equally throughout that abdominal cavity. So long, gentle exhale. Little pause. Then you're going to take a breath in, expand in all directions. And then do another long, gentle exhale. Once again, pulling those guts in. And then from this position, once you feel like you don't have much of an anterior pelvic tilt, you can actually bring your feet in a little closer, push down through your heels, and then step away from the wall and see if you can walk around a little bit and stand with a little bit of that position that you should be in by the end of the activity. All right, and last but certainly not least is some sort of standing supported posterior expansion based activity. Now, I'm gonna use walking sticks here, but you could use something like a counter or a table. The idea here is that you're gonna put your hands on that support surface, you're gonna push down into that support surface and then slightly back so that you shift your center of gravity equally between all aspects of your feet. So you should be able to feel front, middle, and back parts of your feet. And as you're doing this, you're gonna consciously let go of any tension in that low back area. Now, once you're here, you can do a long, gentle exhale, pulling in your abdomen slightly, imagining taking those guts and pulling them up and back inside your abdominal cavity. And then you can repeat that sequence, doing a gentle inhale, feeling expansion in all directions, then a gentle exhale, pulling those guts in. And then once you feel like you're nice and balanced, see if you can relax all aspects of your abdominal cavity, letting your abs relax a little bit in all directions, letting your back relax, and just feeling a very low pressure type attitude with this entire abdominal cavity. And if you can do that and kind of effortlessly be in that position, then see if you can remove the support and stand there and just naturally hold that position without any effort at all. All right, so there you have it. The cause of anterior pelvic tilt is not weak glutes, but instead the forward movement of your guts inside your abdominal cavity. If you can learn how to control this and work with your body to let go of tension, you can go from an anterior pelvic tilt to a more neutral position. And if you want to dive deeper into posture and breathing so you can move and feel your best, then go ahead to the link in the description and join the waitlist for total body restoration. In this 12-week group experience, we're going to be working together through posture and breathing type activities to be able to get you back to the activities you love without pain or limitation. So thanks a lot, as always, for watching this video. And until next time, peace.